Welcome to Talking Europe. Well, Estonia is the most northerly and smallest of the three Baltic states. It is also one of the EU's smaller members with a population of 1.3 million, a quarter of whom identify as ethnic Russians. In recent weeks, Prime Minister Taavi Roivas of the centre-right Reform Party resigned after a vote of no confidence from Parliament. The main criticism against him seemed to be his handling of the economy. His replacement, well, it's likely to come from the Centre Party, a group that has long called for closer ties to Moscow. So after presidential elections in Bulgaria that saw a pro-Russian candidate win, is Estonia also looking for better relations with President Vladimir Putin? Well, to give us his insight on this and many more issues for Estonia, we're joined by a Foreign Minister for the Reform Party, Mr. Jürgen Ligi. Mr. Ligi, thanks so much for your time. Firstly, give us an idea overall, Estonia's position on Russia. Are people wary of a potential land grabbing, which we've heard of in the past from this neighbour? Or do people now think, like what we've seen in Bulgaria, that it's time to open closer talks with Russia, with Moscow?
In case of Estonia, Georgia can't be forgotten. The occupied territories there and Moldova, and certainly not Ukraine. It happened in many Western countries that we forgot quickly what happened in Georgia, and it seemed to have been thinking in the 90s that it's an end of history, that everything is going to liberal democracy and peace. It didn't happen, and there is a lot of setbacks.
I read that this Centre Party, they in the past have, reached out to Vladimir Putin's United Russia Party, calling for neighbourly, friendly relations, deeper bilateral cooperation. If, and I mean everything is still to play for, but if they form part of the next coalition, could things change for Estonia? Could we see a turning towards the east?
Clearly, that party has been saying for a long time things that are unacceptable for Estonia and are quite scandalous also in Europe. I believe that in general the new government will respect our interest and commitments on international organizations.
And I believe most parties have said they want to maintain, their allegiances and cooperations both within NATO and all the EU countries. We did see last week, however, elections in two eastern countries opt for pro-Russian candidates, Moldova for one, and also EU member state Bulgaria in the second place. In the latter, the president-elect Roman Radev is calling on the EU to lift those sanctions on Russia, but he says he won't turn his back on the EU either. Rather, he wants to rebalance the relationship between the EU and Russia. Being a Europhile, he said, didn't mean you had to be Russia-phobe. Let's take a quick look.
Back in Moscow's orbit, have Sunday's elections pushed Bulgaria and Moldova back under Russia's wing? Roman Radev, Bulgaria's socialist-backed president-elect, won nearly 60% of the vote, defeating Tetska Tsecheva, a favorite of Prime Minister Boyko Borisov. Radev opposes the EU sanctions against Russia. It's feared that Bulgaria could now block future EU legislation aimed at punishing Moscow for its role in the Ukraine conflict. Radev also hopes for cooperation between Washington and Moscow.
During his election campaign, the new U.S. president stated clearly that he'd work for a more extensive dialogue with Russia. This gives hope, great hope for peaceful solutions to the conflicts in Syria and Ukraine, for an easing of the opposition and an end to the conflict's escalation.
In nearby Moldova, socialist Igor Dodon defeated his pro-EU rival Maia Sandu with 54% of the vote. Though vowing to represent all Moldovans, Dodon ran on a platform to restore relations with Moscow.
I promise you I will be everybody's president. I will be the president of both leftists and rightists. I will be the president for the ones who want to be part of the EU and also for the ones who want a closer approach to Russia.
Angry about what they've called unfair elections, Moldovans abroad took to the streets. Nearly 700 of them were unable to vote because there were not enough ballots.
Hundreds of citizens who travelled a long way, who stood in cold and under the rain, were not able to vote. This situation is unacceptable.
It's feared that Dodon, who's been criticized for calling Crimea Russian territory, will slam the brakes on Moldova's cooperation with the European Union.
Well, when it comes there to those two specific countries, Bulgaria and Moldova, do you think they've really turned towards Russia, or is that part of getting elected? How might this change things in the region and for the EU?
Fortunately, presidents do not have strong power, those countries, and it's less dangerous than having a pro-Russian government. But I really have to say that it's very easy in democracies to lose the instincts and understand why it's so bad to have such attitudes that Russia is really a threat for whole security in Europe, and it's manipulating also with elections in different countries. It's financing political parties and is aggressive also in practice, having exercises also in the neighborhood of European Union, very close to border, violating airspace, having exercises with nuclear power, having very new tactical divisions close to the border. So, and it has occupied territories. We shouldn't forget that it's occupying several territories in its neighborhood, and has got Crimea is annexed, East Ukraine is occupied.
So you think there is definitely something to be worried about. And of course, Moscow would say that there's a lot of minorities in these countries as well, like the ethnic Russians in Estonia. And they say, in a way, Moscow has to protect these people.
This is, there is of course a big difference whether a country is a member of NATO or not, or even European Union. And those countries are not this. They have been too slow in reforms and in integration to the West, and now losing because of that. But of course the tactics is it's like hybrid tactics. It's not necessarily military. There are other ways to influence neighboring countries. In the case of Estonia, of course, a Russian-speaking population is not wanting to go to Russia. They're not leaving. They have much better living standards.
You mentioned there NATO, and indeed, I believe something like 800 extra UK troops are going to travel to Estonia next year, part of a 50-nation effort, if I understand correctly, to defend the Baltic states. So clearly a threat. Can you tell me a bit more about that, about the latest moves?
This is a very valuable thing. It is the new decision of NATO. NATO has changed its policy since Georgia. First, making plans for Estonia, defense plans, having contingency planning that it didn't have so far. Then came decisions of to have the troops, and the latest enhanced forward presence in the Baltic is extremely valuable. Really, big change in NATO policy, and we highly, very much also French participation there. And
is that really to send a message to Moscow to say, NATO is ready to?
Absolutely, this is a message. First of all, of course, the capabilities of NATO are much better than in case of Russia, but locally they are quick and very dangerous, and nowadays being locally powerful is a real danger.
Now, it looks also that the EU, looking at countries along the east and also the questions of our reliance in the EU on Russia, notably the gas. I believe there's something like 187 million euros invested in a Baltic connector, some kind of gas pipeline between Estonia and Finland. Is that how dependent is Estonia, if you like, on Russian gas, and does that need to change?
We haven't taken energy dependency very seriously, but we are of course working on it. Freedom is more important than gas. We have always been thinking, but the new European energy policy means common energy market and decreasing dependency on Russian gas. Unfortunately, not all projects are going to this direction, but it is accepted principle.
Let me look also, we saw there, of course, a US president-elect who has also said he'd like to warm ties with Moscow. He also, as a candidate, warned that Estonia and other Baltic countries might lose their US defence shield if the EU in general wasn't ready to spend more on defence. I know Estonia is, I believe, one of the few countries that gives 2% of its GDP to the NATO budget. Willing to spend more?
Next year we spend 2.2% and are ready to finance host nation support to NATO troops on top of this 2%, and this is the reason we increased it. But of course Trump was right that Europe should do more, but at the same time Europe shouldn't talk about independent defense. It would be counterproductive. US is not replaceable, and Europe is not shouldn't have any isolation in security issues from US. It should have closer cooperation.
Because again, we saw those ministers of Europe meeting again in Brussels, looking at this common defence strategy, very determined to tell us it's not an EU army, but it's starting to sound a lot like one.
We do not have the option to have separate European army or something like that, though we have to have some capabilities to operate independently in many cases and have more civil dimension, which NATO normally doesn't have. But first we have to care about NATO. And
okay, so that's the priority, needs to stay focused on that. Now, also during your visit here in Paris, a meeting with 3 Baltic states and France, we've discussed that a bit. Another of the topics is relations with Turkey. I know you in the past have definitely supported Turkey's process to join the EU. Do you still?
In principle, yes. We support the giving the perspective to all countries who are willing and willing to join and meeting all the obligations.
Despite the crackdown we've seen on freedom of speech, on the arrestation of anyone that looks to be opposing
those
the government.
things are not meeting the obligations. They are really moving to the wrong directions. But still, Estonia has been not that loud in direction to Turkey publicly. We are not making announcement taking into account the extremely difficult situation in Turkey, the coup, the pride of the nation.
Should we not be starting to speak out, perhaps, as the EU? Should it not be reacting to what's happening in Turkey?
We are reacting. This is a question of style. We shouldn't react in the way that gives contra results, and I personally also during the recent events called Minister Taavi and expressed my extreme concern.
At some point, you imagine EU has to draw the line, perhaps, on who can be a potential.
Boris Johnson said that the death penalty is not an alliance thing. We shouldn't focus on that issue. I turned it a little bit and said that the most alliant thing in our closest partner is repressing the press, parliamentarians and so on, because this is something that doesn't happen in any of our closest islands.
So yeah, that's unfortunately, you draw the line.
Unfortunately, it's still reality. The death penalty is, but death penalty is closed issue in Europe. It's not allowed.
It's not even open, yeah.
We do not open this issue, but we have to admit
that... So visa liberalisation, all that is off the table until Turkey changes in a way.
This is off, but we have to know that there are countries where death penalty is whom we take our closest friends. So the worst thing in this, the most alien things, that would be my expression, is about the rule of law and which we can't accept anyway in any country.
Yeah, no matter what we might need from Turkey when it comes to that migrant crisis. Now, I mentioned there the Reform Party, your party, really was criticised for the handling of the economy in the country. Estonia, though, very pro-free trade. Where do you think your party went wrong on economic policy?
Well, it's not about policy. It's about winning elections 3 times and
Your party was too
general
long in power?
exhaustion. Yes, we have been governing too long.
But
and
why now? Why do
though
people get tired
with
now?
different combinations, we have been very open to cooperation with different parties. But the losers, I would say, still broke the government. There were a couple of parties in the coalition who clearly felt themselves losers and made everything to make the work of this government more difficult.
The coalition that ended up in
yes,
opposition. But does the government need to spend more because you have a surplus in Estonia? Maybe is that the problem?
Public spending is not a recipe for economy. Recipe for economy is good environment in general, in taxes, in e-issues, in infrastructure, and that we have been doing well. In all rankings, Estonia is lying very high about business environment. So this is not the reason to break the government.
What they've complained about is, perhaps a lot of
power.
hot air.
This is power, nothing else.
Pure politics. Well, Mr. Ligi, thanks so much for your insight there into everything that's happened in Estonia and indeed in the wider region. That brings us to the end of this half of Talking Europe. But join us after the news. We'll be looking at the outcome of that climate change talks that were held in Morocco and indeed any impact of that President-elect Trump could have on climate change in the future. See you after the break.